Layman, please make some elephant noises or something to make the camera look at you first.
That's not an I don't I can't do an elephant noise. That was like a yak or something. All right, I'm Layman Pascal, and this is part 3 of the Four Horsemen. We're doing a four-way grope around for meta-progressive consensus in a time of doom. I'm going to get this started with a few framing remarks, and then we'll just rotate through, I think, introducing ourselves, responding to the previous speaker, and or interrupting each other. Today, we're going to look at problems on the left, I guess particularly the American political left, including what the fuck does that actually mean, what has to be done, and why does it keep not getting done. I think maybe I want to also address up front people who say of this series, why isn't the round table changing? Why is it just white men? Things like that. And I would say, look, we're having a specific conversation here, a collective rant. It's not meant to be a comprehensive sample of the population or a grand project to hear all kinds of views. We're exploring a specific ethos and trying to deepen a particular groove. But if you're watching and you are somebody or know somebody who you think would be a great participant for this or an analogous discussion, let us know. We'd love to mix it up. That said, I'll get started saying that.
Just a quick correction there, Layman. But then I'll throw it back to you. You call this the Four Horsemen. We're the Fantastic Four, and the Four Horsemen are, of course, self-described. Vervaeke, Jordan Peterson, Barrett, what's his name, and Jonathan Pajot. They're the Four Horsemen of meaning.
We are not them,
according to themselves. We are definitely. I am definitely not them. But
the Fantastic Four Horsemen of the of Quad Rants or something like that. I just wanted to use that phrasing because it's familiar and it has that ring of doom, but we don't want to get confused with those other Four Horsemen for sure. What is the left? I guess it's a historically instantiated political idea, but for me, it reflects a basic polarity of being. I think there's something like a liberal conservative built into every layer of reality, from particles to chimps to modernity and beyond. I think of the liberal temperament as sort of appreciating change, tending to take up new fads and take education seriously, tending to emphasize things they've heard about rather than just what they've personally experienced, tending to be skeptical about the unpleasant aspects of inherited heuristics, tending to maybe not integrate aggression that well, tending to feel a bit weird about boundaries sometimes, definitely wanting to leverage collective and top-down processes to create updates to our systems. And I think we find this in the Middle Ages. We find this in prehistory, basically every society. I think it's part of the dynamic of how human cultures work. We need something like a left and something like a right. I think it's very essential that we have a gas pedal and a brake, that we have aspirational ideas and some people to ground those ideas. There's a lot of different ways to look at that polarization. But at the same time, we might be in a moment that's very urgent, a moment that can't wait for some of our normal grounding processes, a moment where if we don't do large-scale progressive type things, the civilization could flounder. So we may need to be leaning left at this historical moment. So that's my general, that's my initiating idea.
Also, just to clarify the kind of topic, because I thought we were going to focus more on criticizing liberalism, and by extension we'll get into leftism and what the differences are. But last time we talked about the problems of conservatism in the right wing, and of course focusing on the negative, the obvious negative, and the kind of influence and pull that has on public discourse. But yeah, let's describe and frame the liberal problem as well, and use that as a springboard to discuss leftism or the other way around. Either way, but to kind of
it's a cloudy overlapping territory here, right? There's progressive, there's left, there's liberal, there's a whole cloud. And I think one of the first things we want to do is tease that apart a little bit, looking for these critiques. So sorry to interrupt you, Brent. Keep going.
Yeah, that's basically what I wanted to say. I do wish that we could have a broad sense of a left politics, right? So if somebody like me who identifies as a leftist, that I would like to be able to say that, oh yeah, I support the Biden administration and Bernie's part of it. And, Obama did his best to kind of represent the interests of the left, but that's all, I've been disillusioned along with a lot of other people, right? Because there was, and there is a major chasm and disjunct between leftist politics, which is increasingly becoming normal and universalist, right? So sort of new center at odds with and in tension with the establishment liberal politics and the establishment conservative politics, which are very different, but also, both beholden to corporate interests and beholden to kind of political apathy and stagnation. So, to bring it back to what we're trying to push through, kind of thread the needle here, it is fun, not just articulating what is leftism and what are the best forward-thinking kind of meta-modernist propositions from the left, but who's listening and how is that being integrated, or is it just being rejected a priori?
Well, before coming here, I just listened to a Breaking Points discussion, Crystal and Sagar, on a recent study by a French sociologist on political issues around the world, and how in the US in particular, one of the dichotomy is that the elites in both classes are kind of controlling the narrative. The elites on the right are the people that have the money, the corporatists. And the people on the left who are controlling the narrative are the upper educated left, the intellectuals. And that the working class is getting left in the wayside, but because the right is using more of the culture wars, big example, critical race theory, which they completely misrepresent, and are trying to eliminate all discussion of any kind of race in schools under the guise of calling it critical race theory. So they are, basically cancel culturing this discussion. Whereas the left, or at least some on the left, are engaging them in also criticizing critical race theory. And some of that criticism may or may not be legitimate, but by engaging them in the criticism of the left and not focusing on what the right is doing, using that excuse to cancel culture a legitimate debate in colleges, it's not happening in grade schools. It is in effect, the left, at least some on the left, some of these liberals are in effect supporting what the right is doing by engaging them on their own terms. And to me, that is one of the ways liberalism is going awry and not addressing the fascism that's what's happening on the right.
Yeah, I was thinking about, our discussion last time around, and we were talking about the problems with conservatism and talking about also problems within the Democrat Party, is that there are so many, I think, different ideologically committed groups of people under the same umbrella, and it's sometimes difficult to get things done or to really understand what's the coherent agenda behind this, because we do have the progressives and the liberals and others all working under the same heading. For me, I also was approaching today thinking about, what are some of the criticisms that we can make, of basically the liberals as compared to the conservatives. And one of the things that is standing out to me is what I encounter very regularly, and I was thinking about this in response to something that Carter Phipps put on the post-progressive post website recently, and it echoed to a large part my own experience here in California, which is that there are many people with a liberal mindset, which I deeply resonate with in terms of their values and intentions. But in governance, they tend to fail. And the way that the system is set up, when I travel through Berkeley, compared to some other cities, especially when I lived in red states and I could see some cities there, Berkeley looks like a rundown mess that's just barely hanging on and functioning. And so there seems to be, for me, one real issue is kind of while there's on the left and among liberals, there's a strong element of cognitive grasp and understanding and deep, values and those sorts of things that I resonate with. It doesn't seem very often to be implemented very well. And I think there's a whole layer to that. But when people who are also working class people, when they look from the outside at these different systems, it doesn't inspire trust or hope that we can be putting our issues in competent hands, that really what matters to us is addressed in an effective way. And, I don't know all the reasons for that, but I definitely went what Carter remarked in terms of just the disjunction between high ideals and frequently, almost pathological levels of dysfunctional process in terms of getting things done, housing projects that take 24 years to get approved because of all the, interference from activists and different kinds of people who are standing in the way of new development and things like that. So anyway, that's one issue that I wanted to look at, and why is it that on the side of the liberals versus conservatives, there seems to be higher level of mass. I think there's a historical element to it, but it's not only that. A higher level of systemic competence and wealth accumulation compared to on the left. They seem to be less successful at doing those things.
Yeah, that's insofar as we buy into the story, which I think has some truth to it, that liberals tend to fail to accomplish their tasks. They seem to undermine themselves a lot. And now the question is whether or not that's a failure or success from the point of view of the system and the values that they represent. And then that's one of the issues here, because one of the complaints, you might say, well, if I take liberals at face value, then for some mysterious reason, maybe because of some of their other values, their belief in procedure and bureaucracy and their attempt to compromise between what they think is correct and whatever anyone else is saying, maybe all of that leads them to being weak when it comes to actual successful implementation, which leads to a problem of general trust in their ability to do anything. But the alternative view and the progressive critique is maybe they're not really trying to accomplish any of these things. Maybe liberal values have always been rhetorical, and they represent a certain system, a certain economy, a certain politics, a certain procedural mentality. And they love the fact that they can speak progressively and not achieve that because they don't want to achieve that. They're much closer to the conservatives. And in fact, say the Democrats and the Republicans are largely two aspects of the same liberal modern system, both trying to co-opt their radical fringes and both trying to use the narrative of the danger of radicalism to drive people back to the center where they can keep running business as usual under the guise of making transformation that they never quite accomplish. So I think that's a really open question, whether they're succeeding or failing at what they're doing.
So two things. Going back to the discussion with breaking points, they noticed that one of the reasons that the working class is moving more towards the right, first of all, is because of this focus on cultural issues versus class issues. In other words, wokeism. The right really knows how to negatively frame wokeism, and unfortunately, the left intelligentsia is supporting that by engaging in that debate as opposed to sticking to the class issues, like the Bernie issues, the AOC issues. It's about class. It's about, the corporates ripping us off. It's about, all of that. If we stick to that, we win over them. But the second issue is, in the Democratic Party, like you said, Layman, we have the liberals who sort of promote or stand up for, at least verbally, the liberal issues, but are also bribed and paid off, and they really don't want all of that to happen. They fight the progressives at every step of the way. They promise them, they lie to them over and over again, as witness to just the most recent thing on the infrastructure bill, and now the Build Back Better bill. Biden created a good Build Back Better bill to begin with, largely because of Bernie's influence in putting a lot of progressive policies in there, which has been whittled down. And we don't know what's going to survive of that in the Senate. So we have the progressive versus so-called liberals in the Democratic Party, who the liberals don't really want all those things because they too are bought off and they want to pretend they are. But the thing is, the working class knows they're just lying. They've been fooled so many times. It's like, we know you're lying. We know you're full of shit. And the progressives, are telling it like it is. So that's another reason they're losing the working class.
Yeah, it's easy for the right to say that they care about class issues. Steve Bannon, on behalf of Trump, sort of labeled them as economic populists, right? This was and always will be a lie, because even if they did care about class and economic inequality and, never mind climate change, they're not anywhere close to supporting the policies that rectify that. And the liberals are scarcely better, right? And the phenomenon that I keep observing, and Edward touched on it with critical race theory, is this kind of continued capitulation and appeasement and going along with that right-wing discourse. And they'll give you their reasons, but I reject the self-explanation. The reason they do this is because it's easier. It's easier to bury your head in the sand and not look at what the actual literature of critical race theory says, right? And then you have these centrists and liberals who are saying it's about free speech. They're kind of affirming that it's a free speech issue. Meanwhile, there is a sort of cancel culture towards the left, right? The right coined this term as part of their moral panic. The center bought into it as part of their moral panic. Meanwhile, the most best academics and prominent leftists are refuting those claims, but we're just spinning our wheels. We're not any closer to solving systemic racism if these people keep filibustering the discourse and opposing it, right? And Jordan Peterson is one of these people, one of these pundits. It's like this week, last week, he's retweeting James Lindsay. The guy is a fucking crank, excuse my language, and psychopath, and not a serious scholar, but he gets all these passes from these credentialed centrists, all this tolerance, all this embrace, and all this affirmation that it's actually the woke, that Jordan Peterson called it neo-racism, neo-segregationism. These descriptions are coming from the right. So they're being laundered into the center so that people think and talk like this. Meanwhile, eschewing and blocking the actual leftists who are kind of developing these theories and kind of leading the activism and the social change in the directions that it should go.
Yeah, there's something there that's really interesting to me, which is that, it's hard for me not to imagine that something about the liberal centrist establishment that reflects our whole kind of modern civilization really wants this culture war to predominate. Because when the culture war predominates, then anybody who speaks against the left version of the culture war sounds like a virtuous, pragmatic, liberal, moderate compromiser. And they can spend a lot of their time ushering people back into business as usual, whether they think they're doing that or not, by supporting anybody who looks like they're criticizing the radical left woke. And it's very similar to what goes on with Trump. We go, well, by comparison to Trump, Joe Biden is a great choice. Right, so that the culture war version of the right and the culture version war of the left seem to both perpetuate this narrative whereby we have no choice but to reinforce this center, without any thought that, coming to Graeber's book, without any thought that there really is a much wider set of imaginaries that we could be basing society on, and that human beings have always had a much richer set of options than we have right now, and we're buying into a kind of collective story that there's no way out, even though the one we're using is destroying the entire ecological infrastructure and perpetuating all kinds of strange sufferings. We feel like we can't get out. And one of the reasons we feel like we can't get out is the exaggerated version of both the options is being inculcated in order to be pointed to, in order to reinforce what we're doing all the time.
That's one thing I was thinking about as well in terms of I'm thinking just about American politics, the Democrats, but basically both liberals and leftists, is I don't see many thought leaders and especially many political leaders who are actually inspiring of confidence that they have a handle on the scope of alternate ways of doing things and the scope of the problems that we actually face, the technological and the medical, ethical, scientific, ecological, economic. There are a lot of crises that are coming up, and there are a lot of, I think, innovative ways of thinking and doing things that are emerging that we need to get our hands on, and we need to get our minds around, that we can really begin to think in these more adequate ways to address this constellation of problems. And it's going to take something other than business as usual. And there seems to be so often a kind of a reasoned talking back towards what's familiar, what's known, and there's still that conservatism. Or if it's more radically leaning, it's doing it along, often along the lines of thought that were prevalent 50 years ago and aren't really grappling with kind of the technological and information and medical and ethical landscape that we're in now. So I think there's a paucity of leadership and I think progressive, innovative thinking that for me is disappointing, and it doesn't inspire much confidence in me when I look at really any side of the political spectrum right now. I don't see a lot of innovative thinking that would really capture my interest and my commitment, because it seems to be too cautious and falling short. And I think Graeber's book is pointing towards also how maybe we don't even realize how blinkered we are in terms of thinking of what options for social organization there really even are.
Well, the thing is,
sorry, can I ask a question just to clarify, Bruce? You mean post Bernie? You're not sort of finding any inspiration? Is that what you're saying? Like, because
yes.
I just want to clarify, well, we should establish our own views, but also what I think the left consensus is and what the broader discourse should be around is that things like the Green New Deal and the Bernie movement, we can criticize it and say it's not sufficient, but it is good. It is inspiring. It is the best we have. And so the meta issue is, why didn't that really get a chance to be tabled? Why is it opposed? Why is it suppressed?
Right.
It is sufficiently inspiring and doable. And so, this Overton window, right? This idea of an Overton window, we're trying to get that stuff back into the window, back onto the table. And, I'll agree with you insofar, especially in this current kind of political moment, that there's not a lot of inspiring figures, but, there are still the ones that emerged over the past few years, like Ilhan Omar, and it's worth mentioning kind of the kind of bigoted scuffle or whatever you want to call it with this Lauren Obert person, like she shouldn't even be a congresswoman, right? People like that only exist in the government because they're propped up by fanatical right-wing voters and money. Because what she said is not only disgusting on a human level, it's literally anti-politics, it's anti-democratic, it's anti everything. It's just pro status quo, pro bigotry, pro obstruction of democracy.
I want to leap in and tie a couple of these things together because, like Brett's tabling this question of why, if there are some pretty up-to-date, pretty inspiring policy ideas and characters, why hasn't it been more successful, right? And one of the reasons is there's institutional ideological incentive in the structure we've set up to not make change. One is this thing that Bruce is saying, that they appear insufficient, they appear uninspiring, they appear to be not up to date. They don't make us want to trust institutional change. And another one comes to what Edward was saying about the working class, is there's a sensibility gap. And I think there's more than just we look to the liberals and aren't satisfied. There's a sense in which we're actively upset by them. We find them, right? Many American working class voters find Democrats in principle to be offensive in some reason. And there's a lot of reason for that, because if somebody comes at you on some social issue where they seem hysterical and reactionary on the culture war level, or when somebody comes at you from the level of this is how we implement an administrative bureaucracy, whether it works for you as human beings or not, like everybody has those experiences of being interfered with by some gross people who believe they either represent the system or represent the progressive fads of thought. And there's so much of that a lot of working class people just actively hate it, want to make sure that doesn't get anywhere near. And they've been sold the idea that that's somehow connected to actual, system updates. But I think we do need to address this active antagonism feeling that a lot of people have about liberal systems and liberal individuals.
Well, coming back to what Bruce said about, the motivators in the progressive side, I certainly am personally motivated by Bernie, AOC, the Squad, and the Progressive Caucus. The reason that most working class people are deluded about the Democratic Party is because repeated polling after poll after poll after poll shows that the issues and the values of the progressives always poll in the majority in both parties and with the working class. But the frustration comes from, and I report on this almost daily, comes from the Democratic Party fighting that at every single turn. And they make the promises that they're going to go along with the progressive, meaning we the people's values and policies, but they break the promises. So the working class is like, you say one thing, but then you turn around and do another thing. And I'm just tired of it. And a number of progressive critics have said this is exactly how we got Trump in the first place and how we can get someone like him again. Because it's not that the progressive figures and inspiration isn't there. It's there, but it's also fought by their own party, and corporate media doesn't report on it. Even during the last election, Bernie's reporting in corporate media was like 0.1% of, Biden's. Now, Biden has a lot of inspiring things in the Build Back Better law. A lot of inspiring things, including good environmental conditions and transitions. True, it's not enough, but it's moving in the right direction. But again, me and other working class people are frustrated because, well, first the bill was $6 trillion and had all this stuff. Then it was whittled down to $3.5 trillion and lost a lot of stuff. And now it's whittled down to $1.75 trillion and has a lot of less stuff. And once again, we're like, hey, you guys were inspiring us, so now you're reneging on your promises. So that's why we're losing trust in the Democratic Party. And this makes us ripe for the bullshit lying fascist rhetoric from the right on the cultural issues. The working class, who are not up in all the nuances of all this stuff, are like, well, fuck the Democrats. Yeah, fascism is good.
Yeah, I want to say a couple points to add to that. One is the issue of the cost, the bill, as you just mentioned, Edward. Like, it started at 6 and went down to 3 and down to 1, and like, this is a good example, both in fiscal terms but also in epistemic terms, of how the debate keeps getting contracted on the terms of the opposition. And this is our failure, right? Because only from a new paradigmatic view, which most people aren't using, even in metamodern spaces, right? We're going to get stuck in the weeds of policies and different kind of metaphysical economic assumptions about what we can afford, blah, 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 right? It goes on indefinitely. Only through like an MMT perspective on the economy, for example, it says, no, we should spend 10 trillion over 10 years for a Green New Deal. And this is how we do it, right? But that whole discourse continues to be too high resolution, frankly. It's just too good to be true for some of the people trapped at in these other political corners. Sorry, I forgot the second point.
These bills that are going
wanted,
through in the United States are.
Would you mind if I, just to jump in real quick, because there's a couple of things I wanted to respond to from before it gets too far away. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry for that.
Well, I remember the other thing too. It was along the lines of critical race theory and intersectionality, because obviously, look, if I frame it this way, that it's not either or class issues or race or gender issues, it's all they're interconnected. And before critical race theory was under attack, and it's been under attack for a decade from right wingers, not a lot of people realize that. But, not too long ago, a few years back, they were targeting intersectionality. It's always social justice, but sometimes they hone in on specific words they want to discredit. There's nothing wrong with the concept of intersectionality. It's just like comorbidity in medicine, in physiology and healthcare. So that was the second point. And sorry, Bruce, go ahead.
Great. Yeah, I just wanted to say, because you were asking me, what was I meaning with that critique? And I was inspired by Bernie's first campaign, not really his second. But his first campaign and definitely aspects of the Green New Deal were all inspiring to me. And there's, to me, no doubt that he was thwarted as much or more by his own side than anything else. And that's deeply frustrating. But I do feel often there's a kind of caution in that we want to, push for the minimally acceptable baseline of things that we can be assured that most people will accept. And I think that is valid, and we need to push for those things. But at the same time, while there's more of a focus there, it can detract from the bigger vision that could really inspire a sense of competence and a grasp of the issues and the bigger picture, that I think we need that to have better representation of that as well. And that's where I'm finding the lack.
I'm, thinking as a Canadian viewer of these Biden bills, how much, even though these are very large programs and large accomplishments relative to a lot of other administrations, they don't seem very dynamic. They don't seem like they're adequate to the situation. It's very hard to, compromise is an important virtue, and you have to work with people who disagree with you to get things done. That's absolutely the case. But repeatedly, it seems like the liberals come up with some reason to whittle everything down, and then they either blame the ignorance of the voters, or they think it's a technocratic messaging problem. We just can't figure out, we must be saying it wrong because people don't like this not very triumphant, not very entertaining, not very astonishing thing we did. So there's a huge problem there. There's also an interesting consideration about aspirational openings to negotiations. And this seemed to be, Bernie was able to, in some degree, do this with at least got 6 trillion on the table. Fascinating, right? When you consider the normal liberal approach, the Obama kind of approach, where you come up with your own moderate thing and you start there, then you negotiate with radicals and you whittle it down even less, right? You have to, and people will come forward and go, look, why don't you set a more realistic objective? Because if you don't set a hugely aspirational objective, in the end, the process will have whittled it down and you'll have nothing. So it has to be huge to begin with. And I think this sort of shows the fact that this bill even exists in its massively truncated form shows that the aspirational opening bid approach is essential and effective. And then it comes to, in my mind, the progressive bind that we always see them get into, which is, are they going to do you take a radical stand against things that are better than nothing and reasonable because they're better than nothing and reasonable? Or do you take a radical stand and say, we're not going to accept anything less than what's actually sufficient? And this really hacks the motivation set in people who are reasonable and care about the well-being of the society, right? That if you are a good person who understands the problems we face, you have to take something rather than nothing. But because you have to, the system can constantly manipulate you away from making a stronger fight for what we actually need. So that's a cluster of conundrums that I look at from up here.
Well, that was part of what happened with the progressives saying to the party, we are not going to vote for the infrastructure bill unless and until the Build Back Better bill passes the Senate first. And they stood firm on that for the longest time. And they actually got the party to start making concessions to them. But then they caved because it was like, well, once again, we're going to settle for something that's better than nothing, which perpetuates the status quo. So the House then came up and passed a Build Back Better law, which has a lot of the stuff that not just the Republicans, but the Republicans in the Democratic Party don't want, which because it actually, invests money in environment and human infrastructure. And they just want, to keep fossil fuels going and to hell with, the people. So it's gone back to the Senate. Now, this leads to the next area of how the liberals are failing. I've seen, some of the liberal talking heads, Robert Reich, Tom Hartman, in the last few days saying, if we want to maintain democracy, we have to get rid of the Senate filibuster because laws are happening around the states in Republican legislatures that are not just limiting the vote, but are purging voters. And not even just that, they are creating a system whereby they can override the vote. They can override the results of the vote by saying fraud, which we know has been proven is itself the fraud. So we must eliminate the filibuster to pass federal legislation that disallows these Republican states to do what they're doing. Otherwise, the Democrats may never win another election in our lifetime because of the gerrymandering, because of, eliminating votes they don't like, which is exactly what they're doing. So both Reich and Hartman are saying, Biden, you're the president of the United States. Use your damn bully pulpit. Go into these states. Make them pay for their refusal to eliminate the filibuster and pass this, federal legislation. Once again, Biden and the Democratic Party are so weak on this issue that they're just allowing this to happen. They're saying the right words, but they're not actually doing, except for Bernie and some of the progressives. Bernie actually went into West Virginia and started to do this. He started to campaign against Mannequin. I call him Mannequin because he's just a figurehead for the frickin' Republican Party. So we need that. We need a massive media campaign to get rid of the filibuster and make the issue democracy versus fascism. That's another way that liberals are weak. Even progressives, they're like, well, these authoritarians, they're fascists. Call them fascists because that's what this is. It's a battle between democracy and fascism. And if we don't put it in those terms, we're not strong about it, we will lose democracy.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of literature to back that up too. Obviously there's a lot of moral panics on the right about Marxism and whatnot, but there's a lot of good, academic books and arguments about the rise of neo-fascism in the United States. And there's strong forms of that and there's weak forms. I'm partial to the weak forms, actually, which says that, even under Obama, you have a police state, you have a military industrial complex, you have the white racism, right? So the fascist elements are still there. I also wanted to pick up on a key phrase you said, Edward, which was the bully pulpit. That's a phrase Bernie used when he was asked on the campaign trail, how are you going to do this and that? How are you going to, whip up kind of momentum and support for these programs? He said he's going to use the bully pulpit. And I believe he would do a relatively effective job at that, especially with that presidency, with that office, because he is a good leader and mobilizer regardless. Like Edward's saying, Bernie's doing it. Bernie goes out and does it. And my last point is about this word filibuster. I use this word all the time, not in the legislative sense, but I find it interesting that there's all these, debates when really, the progressives are just saying, get rid of it. We need to get rid of it. But the word filibuster is kind of an inherently bad thing. And the reason I use it a lot is because liberals and conservatives and reactionaries, they're filibustering. When there's an argument they use, and I'll read the definition, it's like an act or an action of prolonged speech that obstructs progress, an obstructive manner in a legislator, especially speaking at an inordinate length. And so, there's the specific sense they use that in the Senate, but I'm using it in the general sense of just all this droning liberal centrism, just talking and punching left and working with the right. And so we don't just need to get rid of this in Congress. We need to get rid of it as a kind of methodology that people use, as a kind of interference for discourse and for sense making and conflict resolution. We need to abolish that kind of procedural engagement with these topics, because it's just a way for them to shut down the left.
I think there's a huge issue there because obviously we need mechanisms to keep ourselves from rushing into changes that are unrealistic or don't understand the value of things we already have. But at the same time, the counter danger is endless stalling and quibbling and undermining anybody's ability to actually collectively make a decision and instantiate anything. And that's going to be more and more of a problem as the ecological, economic, and technological context of the world becomes increasingly radical. And we see the countries that are adapting to it are the ones who are doing it in a very strong authoritarian manner. So that's the other choice. If we don't figure out how to change the mechanism so that we can make bigger decisions faster when the world is changing more quickly, then the only other alternative than collapse is to shift into a very strong authoritarian mode. So we're going to see the liberal system drift in that direction unless it gets tweaked in order to have a democratic process that can make big decisions and implement them more quickly.
The democratic process does not need a filibuster. In fact, it's antithetical to it and it's got to go.
Are we all anti-filibuster? What about you, Bruce?
Yeah, I think it's unnecessarily obstructive. Going back to a point that I made earlier about the difficulties with implementation and governance. I do think that there's a commitment to that, as Layman's point. I think that's a valid, good point. But I've seen it in action in more left-leaning groups as well that are not liberals, but they're leftist, but they get stuck in process and protocol, and they don't get very much done. And so I do think we need more intelligent decision-making processes, which is, something that we've been trying to explore on Love the System, for instance, is how can we make decisions in a quicker and more, distributed intelligent way than we're able to achieve right now. Because I think you're absolutely right that otherwise we are going to feel increasingly this pull towards authoritarianism, where things that just need to be done get done through force because the reasonable approach isn't responding to the exigencies of the time.
I think that's where we can learn something from the Graeber book, is that, these multiple ways of political social expression throughout history. Some have been authoritarian and violent and using military force to get things done. And some have been more cooperative and consensus and have been at least semi-successful from their research. So we have some history that we can have not so much top-down hierarchical control. We can have other forms of governance that actually work and have worked for hundreds of years in the anthropological record that we can learn from. We don't need to retro-romantically take them as they are in their culture during that time. We can update them. That's why I kept mentioning the collaborative commons, which is an update of some of these ideas for today's world. And the fact that you will never hear this, unfortunately, even from the liberal side, of the numerous ways it's already in effect and working. We have all kinds of reports from Jeremy Rifkin. We have all kinds of reports from the Commons Transition, from the P2P Foundation, how these principles of social organization are not just philosophical ideas, but are in practice in the world right now, and they're working.
Yeah, and to build off of this, I said to you guys before, maybe it was off the record a few weeks ago, but that Graeber's a leftist, and as this book comes out and people start to write about it, they're gonna erase that part of him. They're gonna misinterpret it, and it's not to dunk on Brendan Dempsey at all here, but we're kind of invoking and discussing his review, and I think it takes shortcuts to get to his point. Now, there's lots of qualifications, like Brendan says, he's not a Pinker fan. He agrees with a lot of what the book is saying, and that he's just kind of left unsatisfied by some of the kind of cheap shots or kind of straw man arguments that the authors use. So I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. But like I said, Brendan's article doesn't mention leftist or socialist at all. So it's omitting that context, which I'm saying is necessary to have an authentic read and interpretation of this book. So Brendan's trying to critique it in good faith while still saying it's mostly good. But I'm saying the more steelman the book, while still allowing some room for critique, like if Graeber's not explicit about MMT, because he is an MMTer, but he might not be explicit in the book or elsewhere sufficiently, same thing with his leftist politics. If that's not declared in the book, it's going to kind of cause misreadings and reactions of this sort. Nevertheless, Graeber, as Brendan picks up on, Graeber is gesturing at a kind of paradigm shift that in part has always been with us. And so for me, that's most salient in kind of what the contemporary socialist movement is and the post-capitalist kind of, prerequisites for that. So I just wish his reading, and as well as other people's receptions of this book, that they understand that, kind of what Graeber's broader project is. And if we want to incorporate it with metamodernism, it's not, you can't do so by kind of sidestepping the political issue. And especially with respect to the Pinker thing, like there's a broader context there. So Brendan kind of steps up in defense of Pinker. And I would say that that's just misinformed. It's out of place, because an authentic reading of the anti-Pinker stuff, a lot of it is just dismissive. We hate this guy. We want him gone forever. I'm partly part of that camp, but not without good reason. Again, my meta point here is that Brendan is sidestepping the issue, whereas I debated this for 2 hours with Greg Henriquez to no avail, I would add. But the point is that the arguments are sometimes hard to grapple with directly on the issue of some of these prominent centrists like Pinker. Like, we tend to just sidestep the epistemics of the issue and inherently want to take more of a forgiving and rehabilitative approach. And I'm saying, until you see people like Pinker or any of the intellectual dark web, until you see them making clear kind of telegraphed moves in a left direction or in a forward direction, we don't have to tolerate them. We don't have to compliment and accommodate their contributions in this regard.
Well,
because I think Pinker's a net negative. I'll just say that.
A quick comment on that is part of my response to Brendan's review in his thread in Metamodern Spirituality was that, yes, the book does take this, snotty attitude towards the people it disagrees with, but it's kind of, for me, it's showing how the snotty attitude is coming from the people they're criticizing doing the same thing without support. And I extended this to the integral metamodern movements, which are also known to be rather snotty and superior and condescending. And one of the comments in that thread, I'm not going to name names, but one of the comments in that thread was basically, look at those, destructive postmodernists who are useless, who they're just going into retro-romantic Garden of Eden, regression. And to me, that's a prime example of exactly what's wrong, that's extended in our integral and metamodern communities, that they continue from modernism, is this exact superiority complex that doesn't take what's valuable in their criticism, in the book's criticism. Even if we accept that they are only postmodern, and I put a big if on that, they're still making some valid criticisms. Now, Brandon did take some effort at pointing that out in his review, which I appreciated, and told him I appreciated that. But I know it's hard for us as human beings that when people like the book and ourselves are so committed to our own views that we straw man other views. We all do it, and we all put them down. We need to be self-aware of that when we're doing it and not commit the same fallacy.
Yeah, Brendan's one of my favorite people, and I'm sure his critique will come up a little bit tomorrow when Jeremy and I talk more deeply on Clubhouse about this book. But I don't get the same feeling that these people are getting, that there's some kind of radical postmodernist imbalance in the Graeber Wengrow book. What I'm hearing is the classic Graeberian style. I mean, it's a little bit overreaching. It's a little bit, there's a dry humor there that doesn't always picked up. It takes digs at some of the modern system, and it does that in part because there's a tremendous amount of problem and suffering and insufficiency in this system. It's not just a neutral history, like Brent is saying. There's a serious moral perspective that's involved in making these critiques. Yeah, Pinker is a guy who, he's a bright guy, but the way he frames everything and the mood that he brings forward feels like it suggests that business as usual is working out great. And that's a very dangerous attitude. I tend to critique Pinker the way that Nassim Taleb critiques him, which is it only takes one extremely cataclysmic event, which is highly likely, for all of those statistics about progress to have to be reframed completely. And I think there's a certain perverse pleasure in the moderatists that they congratulate themselves on being non-radical, on being compromisers, rather than on focusing on what they actually think needs to be done and fighting for that. And that sends a message to people that they aren't really serious, because we don't see them fighting for these things. We see them going along, sort of half-heartedly putting forward some programs and making some changes and admitting to some facts, and then wondering why everybody else doesn't support their wonderful achievements. But it's partly because, and this goes a lot to, I think, the culture of the working class, is we need to see them actually have some skin in the game. We need to see them actually fight for something that they think is true and important. Otherwise, it's very hard to think of them as our leaders and champions.
Now, you can delete this or filter it out afterward, but one of the I think it should stay in, and this is why. We've already discussed how the working class resents the elites. And this discussion you're having with Jared and me tomorrow on Clubhouse is an elite forum and format. I encourage you to make it public on YouTube, regardless of what Clubhouse wants, because it's not available to everybody. You have to have a certain app, you have to have certain devices, and I don't want them. I want the information to be commonly shared.
All right, I am making a note to myself to bring that up tomorrow. I almost never use Clubhouse except when they invite me on. I don't find it a terribly engaging app myself. But yeah, it's one in which a lot of people are just not going to find that information for sure.
This is bit of a tangent, but just along those lines, like apps like Clubhouse came out first exclusively on Apple. It is on Android now, but like immediately, along with all these other kind of adjacent social media spin-offs like Parler and Gab, almost immediately they became just another intellectual dark web echo chamber, right? And just like, oh, Eric Weinstein's on Clubhouse, let's everybody rush in there and listen to what he's saying. And these apps partly gain traction just because it's like an extension of Twitter. It's like, and Twitter has its own version now called Spaces, I think. And so you can just be, passively listening to this conversation if you're driving in your car or working or whatever. And then you can join too. So it's a novel kind of format. It is exclusive. It's ephemeral because it's not recorded. But the point I'm making is just how all these spaces get, reactionaries gravitate to them. And so we do have to, I think, always be striving in the other direction to make our content as widely accessible as possible, and as like both in the technical sense, but also in the content sense. And to be anti-fascist, to stop, playing into these different discourses.
Well, in your discussion with Jeremy, he said he was going to do something separate. I encourage him to do something separate besides the Clubhouse, which I may never see. Is briefly in the both IPS and the Metamodern Spirituality forums, I had mentioned a quote from Jennifer Gidley on Gebser, which seemed to me consistent with these sort of growing down sort of developmental models. And he said, in our discussion in his forum, that yes, they are consistent. Gebser is consistent with that, in that it's not teleological. It's not a progressive stacking of layers that go into each other in terms of development. They are mutations, they are separate, and they are all equally valid and need to be somehow integrated for integral a perspectival consciousness to make sense of it, which is to me a slightly, if not radically different approach than typical developmental models that just everything's included. This is included in this, and this is transcendent included in So I hope in your discussion with Jeremy, when you talk about this, how Graeber supports that view that our indigenous populations aren't archaic in the sense that they're noble savages, which is a huge issue in the book, that they are themselves very complex human beings and thinkers. They just chose a different, or some of them at least, chose a different path. And that per Gebser, all of these mutations need to be integrated as opposed to subsumed.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope we have time to get into that tomorrow, and in whatever other form we continue that discussion. And it's also, it's technically what the integral model says, even though it's certainly not what the integral ethos often gravitates around. There's something I'm curious about. Like, I'm trying to think, what are the worlds, to bring this back to the liberals and the left, what are the different worlds that are at war here in terms of futures, in terms of being created? Like, what do we think? What do we think the world is that Trumpists want to create? If they were successful, what does the world look like in 20 years? If the liberals are successful, what does the world look like in 20 years? If the progressives are successful, what does it look like? What are the different realities or collective imagined spaces that are trying to be brought forth that are concealed under some of these generic terms like the left?
Well, and I think that's where Graeber's book is a prime example, because he goes into how both of those, or a variety of ways of social organization, did this in the past and the consequences of it. And I think we must learn from the past if we don't want to repeat it. And the vision of the current Republican Party is going down a fascist road that we may lose democracy altogether. And I'm not exaggerating. A lot of progressive commentaries, very intelligent people, far more intelligent and knowledgeable than I, are saying this. And if we go down the progressive vision, it looks to me more like some of these indigenous cultures of the past that went down a different road, that had more egalitarian, more commons-centric ways of being, of taking care of each other, and less of the top-down leadership style. It wasn't completely eliminated, but it was, somehow balanced with some of these different, modes of being. So I think that's one of the benefits of the book for me, is showing what we've already done in history and what we should learn from if we don't want to get stuck. And they say we're stuck in the current capitalistic, male-dominated, hierarchically dominated, top-down law of inequality and income inequality, and where money decides. And that's where we're going to keep going if we don't do something.
It's fascinating that you say that, that, because that's as a left vision that is opposed to top-down control, it runs against what a lot of people assume about what the left stands for. Like, when people think of Marxism or communism, very often they're thinking of some kind of weird imposition that's going to come down from the top. Or even when we look at liberal bureaucratic administrationalism, that's also an exaggerated amount of top-down protocol control. So in a lot of people's minds, the liberals and the progressives and the left all represent top-down control to them. So it's almost a strange message to say that the heart of the vision is to decrease that top-down control and establish a more organic, bottom-up, diverse kind of freedom.
And I can completely understand why they would feel that, and because it's true, in the Democratic Party is exactly doing that. But the book talks about some of these societies that had, local councils. And this goes with the vision of the collaborative commons, local commons that deal with local issues, but are still connected to, larger organizational structures, even internationally, but with, certain values in place that we need to, to say the trite expression, think globally and act locally. And panarchy and all these other, collaborative commons and commons transition are all about this movement to give power back to people in local governments so that they feel like they are empowered to create something in their own lives. And with just a top-down federalist system, that takes that away. Now, I did mention to you guys, it's something I don't think I can get into because I haven't read it in depth, is Piketty's new article on participatory socialism, which seems to be along those lines of, having these kinds of social political organizations where people actually have some input on their life. So it's true what you're saying, that, the Democratic Party is certainly part of the problem in their own sort of fascism, top-down control of, we know what's best for you, but we need to let people tell us what's best for them and listen to them and put them in fucking office.
Bruce, when you think of conservatives, liberals, and progressives, what kind of worlds do you think they're moving towards if they were successful?
I hear Trump in particular invoking an idealized past when everything in the people's memory seemed to be working and more effective and less complex and less, so I see him invoking a vision of a return to a past that maybe never existed, but that people will hope, there could be a return to. But I think also there is a kind of deafness among the Democrats in the U.S. to some of how and where his message is resonating and what people are seeing. And for me, I work and have interface with a lot of different immigrant communities. So I get to listen to a lot of the conversations among Indians and Nepalese and Chinese people, for instance. And a lot of them are actually very concerned not only with the systemic kinds of issues that the Democrat Party wants to address in terms of, different kinds of power imbalances and injustices, but also different systemic dysfunctions and abuses that are happening pretty broadly across the country. And Trump's message actually is resonating with them more than the Democrat message, because at least the right is acknowledging that there are certain problems. And I think if you look at conservatives and liberals, there's probably not actually much of a commitment to making any big difference in this anyway. It's more a matter of just speaking to it. But in terms of, unbridled immigration or, the withdrawal of support for police forces or making it difficult for police to do their duties in certain situations, and issues around the abuse of the provisions by the government of money, to people for different, there's a lot of abuse of that in terms of how social security numbers are used by multiple people. And there's a lot of exploitation of the support that the government gives, that the immigrant community, because that's what it's coming to them, and they're seeing many of their own people actively abuse it, and they think this is wrong, right? And so that message, they want to see a system that was part of what was making America great in terms of a fairly functional system. And so that Make America Great language is resonating, even though it's appealing, I think, to a fantasy and doesn't address a lot of the, the whole systemic issues and problems that the left is trying to resolve. But by being fairly blind to these concerns among immigrants about how the system that attracted them here is being regularly compromised and attacked and undermined from the inside by immigrants and by other people who just don't have a commitment to doing very much about it because they want the immigrant vote. But there's a strong concern around that. In terms of other worldviews, I think it's a really great question. And one of the things that's been a point of frustration for people, I think, around integral in its own both political engagement and incompetence in some ways, and its capitulation to the status quo very often. Ray Harris had an article, almost 20 years ago, maybe, it's a while back, where he was pointing out, if integral really followed through on the prime directive, greatest depth for greatest span, it would not be, and it would not involve liberal status quo activities. It would really call for some pretty broad systemic change. And I think the commons-based approaches and the emerging P2P approaches and some of the other, I haven't read Graeber's book yet, but maybe some of the things that Tyson Yunkaporta is pointing to in terms of different ways of organizing. I think there's our technology can be used to support a much more deeply participative and distributed form of sense making and collaboration than is sustained right now, that I think we need to move towards. But it may be, as Ray Harris is pointing out, that we can't imagine that we're going to keep proceeding at the same level of affluence and privilege and comfort that we've been used to. So there's some aspect, even though I don't really align with the doom and the post-doom people, like there's a whole movement around that all we have to prepare for now is collapse and how to adjust to collapse. I think we do have to be mindfully aware of that, but at least I think what we're looking at is not exporting our level of thriving to the whole world, but a massive adjustment that we need to basically get used to a simpler way of being and living together. And technology could serve that without necessarily requiring all the complexity that we think is necessary and we take for granted.
Quick plug, there's a really good article in Integral View, January 2019, From Capitalism to the Collaborative Commons. I highly recommend it to everybody.
Hey, I think you wrote that.
I want to touch in on something around this. Sorry.
Well, actually, Layman, I wanted to answer your question before we move on. Please. Your question was, what are the respective 20-year visions of the right, the center, and the left? And not to be overly dismissive, but I'm going to just try to be succinct. I think the right and the center, both, they have different visions and aspirations, but largely very little rocking of the boat, very much support of the status quo, which again, in the context, zoom out, metamodernism, paradigm shift, we're thinking about things differently. Okay. And what makes the left vision for the next 20 years is much more, for lack of a better word, extreme propositions and movements, right? So abolitionism as a movement. It's not just about abolishing slavery as an institution, right? It goes through many targets, and one of them is sort of the prison system, the military-industrial complex, abolition of our current sort of capitalist money order, right? The way money is thought of. And so the right and the center don't have a vision in terms of anything except sort of survival, and still in the context of zero sum kind of scarcity, and that's the wrong thinking. because the left vision is like abolishing the military industrial complex, or at least, if we want to use different rhetoric to accomplish the same things, repurposing it to address climate change, right? So demilitarization and address climate change. And so just to kind of close out the point I'm making about centrism, liberals, and the right wing and how they discourse about these things, you'll hear words like national security, right? Or foreign policy, right? Even in the most neutral sense, okay? Those terms are antiquated, and they imply a sort of inside and outside, a sort of in-group and out-group, right? And so this is why it's fundamentally, from a paradigmatic view, it's bankrupt thinking, because it's very easy, even as a leftist, to become susceptible to some of that language. Oh, what's the leftist position on foreign policy? Well, the way Bernie answered this question is we need to deal with climate change. That is the global leftist, international socialist, if you will, approach to foreign policy. So you see what I did there? What Bernie's doing is a kind of rhetorical trick. He's actually overcoming the linguistic barriers, right? And saying, well, we're not going to do this methodological nationalism anymore. In fact, Ulrich Beck, famous sociologist, coined methodological cosmopolitanism as an alternative. So that's my kind of long-winded answer to your question of what are the three respective visions of the 20-year future. We don't want to even see, regardless of what they think their vision is, the paths we're going to head down with the center, the centrist, and the right-wing politics is antithetical to the actual coherent left-wing universalist proposals and the idea of paradigm shift to transform the military-industrial complex.
Yeah, I think that's really important, is that there's a new thing, a new change is really only supported by one of these three groups, and I'm sympathetic to national security concerns, but obviously it has to be like with Graeber's notion of a more diverse history of social options that we can imagine, there's a much more diverse set of national security threats than the ones we've been previously mobilizing towards, right? And even if we were going to have a semi-private, semi-public, extremely corrupt military force that just wants to get paid for producing these things, we could do that fighting climate change just as well as we can do it fighting the Afghans, right? So like that, there's a machine. It could be done if we had an expanded version of what's an actual survival threat to our citizens. I think the idea that of those three groups, only one of them is challenging the basic notions of money and quantification and how we run the economy, which is a real limitation at the moment, even though it's had some historical successes, it's currently the limitation, and only one of those three groups is challenging that. That's a very important thing to keep in mind. But I wanted to come back to something Bruce was saying, just because I'm curious about it. These conversations you're privy to among certain kinds of Asian immigrant communities, Bruce, and their concern, which is sort of a conservative concern about why the system is failing due to people exploiting the system. I wonder why it seems, from your point of view, why do they seem to think of that exploitation primarily as low-level distributed individuals like themselves, as opposed to bankers and chairmen and presidents, like the people hacking the system and exploiting it and ruining it? All right, is it conceived of as a small number of extreme economic super predators, or are they not so concerned about that and they're imagining a whole bunch of anomalous low-level parasites on the system?
It's both. Among those that I talk to, there's a strong concern that, there's a strong concern that there is exploitation, of our system and a capture of the system by the elite, which is why many still do vote left, but at the same time, or vote Democratic, but at the same time, they feel like there's not attention paid to the lower level corruption. And I think it's not that it's not that the lower level corruption needs to be paid to or elevated above its overall role, but they feel like it's just not being paid attention to at all. It's kind of discounted. And they're feeling largely insecure in the face of that, and they don't trust the overall system. If the system is willing to turn a blind eye to that, then they can't trust the system, the party overall, if it's not pushing for integrity in general. And but it seems like just a whole spectrum of types of exploitation. But this is an area where they feel like it should be addressed, and it's one that actually impacts them in a more visceral way, more immediately right now. If there's impeding, not all immigrant groups or minority groups feel the same about the police. And yes, there are definitely abuses among the police force that need to be addressed, and that there are certain communities that feel regularly under threat by them. But there are other immigrant communities that the more that the police are scaled back or impeded, they feel more vulnerable and threatened on the streets in a daily way. And so I think we need to get better at speaking across the board to a kind of integrity.
And that's something where liberals are bad at both, right? Which is to say that conservatives are really good at pointing at bottom-up crime and looking at the least advantaged people and making it seem like there's a plague of them that has to be put down by more authoritarian measures. And then people in the progressive camp are much better at saying, look, we've got some real serious top-down crime going on here, which massively outweighs all the bottom-up crime. And the liberal centrists don't seem to really attack either, right? They can commend themselves on their admirable balance, but they're only getting that balance by not really going after either problematic set.
Right. And there's one thing that Brent said, that among not the necessary, some of the immigrant community I listen to, and also just among conservative people I'm around, there's concern that climate issues and climate measures and initiatives are all a front for basically just instituting a socialist or communist government. So I think that there is, the emphasis on climate change is really, important. It's a big issue, and it makes a lot of sense for progressives to be focusing on that as a priority. And I think we also, especially the U.S., spend obscene amounts on military that, that money could be used much better in other ways, in my personal opinion. But we have a messaging and a language problem, because I think we're not getting a lot done collectively on climate change, because there is such a pervasive sense among conservatives and right-leaning people that the climate issue is not so much a thing. It's a front for a hidden agenda, and therefore they can sweepingly dismiss it. And again, we can't come to any meaningful practical consensus around steps to take because of that. And I think, yes, in part it's also manipulation of the situation by those on the right to exploit certain things to basically straw man them and characterize them in a certain way. But the close alignment of socialism and environmentalism, I think, has to be addressed in a way that we can speak past that to the very practical concerns that everybody, regardless of political orientation, is going to face in 20 years if we don't address this.
Well, I think what Brent brought up there about Bernie's attempt to tweak the messaging is important in that regard, is that this is a national security issue, right? This is about protecting our land. This is about fighting an enemy. This is about us securing ourselves. That's a very different kind of discourse, but it might cover the exact same ecological measures that we have to take.
Well, keep in mind that the Pentagon itself put out a gigantic report stating that the climate crisis is the number one national security issue. Number two, part of the reason that the people you're talking about, Bruce, are being strongly influenced in that way, not that they don't have legitimate reasons, but part of it is the humongous financial investment in right-wing radio. and also right-wing television shows like Fox News. Enormous. They spend an enormous amount of money in doing this, whereas the left wing has no similar kind of media structure to get into the daily lives of, working class. Now, this isn't particularly true of their conservative investment in Spanish-speaking radio stations. That's why you see a lot of Spanish-speaking people moving that way, because every time they're driving in their car to and from their 2 and 3 jobs, this is what they're hearing. The left will not invest in this. The left media, such as it is all on YouTube or the internet. And not everybody has YouTube or the internet, especially the working class. So if we don't make an equivalent kind of investment in mass media, obviously corporate media is never going to do this because they're the ones in the middle trying to, avoid even talking about these things. We need mass media to reach, people, to start not just giving them the facts, but to giving them the frames and the values that address their issues. Without that, it's a tough battle.
I wanted to touch on this issue, just generally speaking, because it came up at the beginning too, and that's to do with who's holding the wealth, who's good at business, and who's not good at business, right? Let's remember, money makes money, and it's not creating real value. So anyone who has money can become a good investor relatively safely. But the point I wanted to make is about political contributions and what money does to you. We need to remember that, right? Because there's very few, if any, left-wing billionaires. And if there are, they typically don't invest their money in the right places politically. And I mean that in a specific sense, but I'll draw on an example that just comes to mind, right? I think it was in the 2016 cycle. Jay-Z, right? One of the most known and successful and rich, super rich rappers, held a private fundraiser for Hillary Clinton, right? And we all know that Kanye West supported Trump, right? That's way in the other direction, but it's like, George Clooney too is one of these rich, ostensibly social justice kind of activists, right? He does a lot of that kind of stuff, but he does it through the frame and, through the mechanisms of the kind of mainstream, these liberal kind of plutocrats even, it's like, why is George Clooney and Jay-Z just contributing to that space? They're investing in that discourse. And I think it's a major mistake, if not just an oversight. And so the issue is, well, where, like Edward's saying, like, where is the money going to come from? Like, Bernie's campaigns were funded by grassroots working class people, and I think that's great. It's cool. Unfortunately, it's definitely not sustainable, right? Because once you deplete all of those people's bank accounts and goodwill, and then you lose to boot. Or conversely, because another example I've seen lately, Nancy Pelosi, who's obviously not friendly to the left, she's sending out emails and asking people for money, whether it's for campaign contributions or whatever, to defeat the filibuster, whatever it is. It's like, you're just insulting people and you're draining their bank accounts. And ultimately that could and might have the effect of driving them to the right. As voters, as we touched on, so instead of going left, as they should go, to trust the left populists who want to restructure the economy and society to level the playing field, things just keep getting tilted right. So I don't think a solution can be proposed like, what's his name? The guy who owns basketball teams. He's a little bit more left than Elon Musk. Let's say, we can't count on those people to do this. We just need to sort of win without the money even. And then it will be about restructuring the economy and reforming institutions.
Yeah, this question of what money does to us is hugely important. And I'd like to come back to it, but there's something I don't know, I'm slipping into host mode again. I have a question for Edward. Like when you're talking about communication and right-wing radio and Fox News and things like that, I wonder how much you think the problem is tactical, and how much you think it's attitudinal. Like tactically, we could say, look, the Democrats are failing to do adequate Latino outreach. They don't have enough radio engagement for the working class. They should be doing more repetitive propagandistic work and framing. So that's tactical. On the other hand, there's an attitudinal component, which we could say, look, if you're a liberal and you went to university and you got a pretty good job where you all pat yourselves on the back for being in the educated top 20%, you probably don't understand the value of professional wrestling, right? Whereas a guy like Trump gets professional wrestling, and he gets that a lot of Americans get that, and that's how they see things. That's what they want to hear, right? Is there something that even if liberals were doing a more tactical, competent messaging outreach, is there something in them that doesn't understand how to satisfy something in the working class? That the working class has a sensibility that those liberals can't understand and therefore can't reach out to.
Yes, and that's why the criticism of the intellectual elite on the liberal side, they're mostly themselves lawyers or upper class professionals that have never had to struggle a day in their life. So they don't understand that. And hence they don't think, they still, as Lakoff says, still believe in the Enlightenment reason notion that, you know, if you're educated and you have the right reasons and you can articulate them, the facts, that is enough. And it's obviously not enough. That's why you have people like Bernie and AOC. Bernie has been in politics his whole life, and you can consider that the working class because he hasn't taken all the corporate money. He lives a fairly frugal lifestyle compared to the rest of them. Obviously, he still makes more money than almost every working class person. The pay in the Senate is pretty good, and he has made investments. He owns property, but he understands the working class because that's where he comes from. He lived it. Same thing with AOC and many of the squad. They've struggled to make ends meet. So that's part of the problem, is the educated elite in the Democratic Party basically never had to work a day in their life at a working class job. And so obviously that's why even the progressives who are in the same boat, at least they feel, I feel your pain. At least they can relate to it and speak to it and, try to address policies that help people, increase the minimum wage, make policies that take care of, benefits that, childcare, healthcare. At least they're trying to make policies to help people. So even though many of them themselves are upper class professionals, professional politicians, they still have some sense of empathy. And I think empathy is a key ingredient here. Having empathy for people that you really can't directly relate to. And this is, once again, a difference of psychology in liberals and conservatives. Liberals, being more educated, somehow maintain empathy for people not like themselves and want to help people not like themselves, whereas, and these are generalizations, but they're backed up by, psychological studies, numerous of them. Conservatives only see things in their own world, their own family, and their empathy extends, that's about as far as their empathy extends into their family, into their religious group, or whatever. So part of it is the technological messaging, reaching people through mass media, but part of it is the messaging of empathy. And this is, where Lakoff talks about this all the time, focus on the empathy, talk to people where they are, listen to them, like Bruce does with his people. He listens to what they say, empathize with them, and commiserate with them, and somehow try to message with them something that doesn't sound like a bunch of intellectual bullshit.
I just want to add to that because you mentioned the minimum wage, and we know that the minimum wage hasn't changed in 20 years. And this is so important, such a good example, just to say that is insane. That is utterly insane. Of all the sort of nonpartisan things we could point to as well that you'd think we could just do, like follow some sort of incremental standard so that it tracks with inflation or something. But I raised the point not just to say that blocking the minimum wage efforts is insane. It's obviously insane, but the discourse that creates that paralysis is insane. and it's one of these things like you really have to be scrupulous and observe that anybody who's opposing that, it's not just that they're not moral or they're far right, because liberals do this too. They come up with abstract reasons to oppose a certain thing, right? And again, we get stuck in the weeds of policy debates, which is neither here nor there. It's one of these issues. If we look at it with basic math, can you afford to live off of it? No. Can the economy afford to do it? Yes. But a lot of, of this, again, this libertarian mindset, this kind of market fundamentalism, capitalist realism, it tricks people. And, think tanks help. Think tanks help in this process. The mass media helps. It makes people think that they're really smart and clever for coming up with academic, pedantic reasons for opposing something. And that's just one example out of dozens of examples. So, until we can deal with these extremely simple, what should be non-objectionable, non-confrontational public socioeconomic issues, we're going to continue to be screwed.
Well, two things real quick. The minimum wage issue came up way back in the first legislation that was, came up and was going to be in there. The liberals, the Democratic Party, backed out of it because they were pressured by the corporatists in their own party. Two, the mass media. We have had a number of massive workers' strikes across this country. I have heard next to nothing about it in corporate media. And some of these strikes have produced positive results where workers are getting better wages and better benefits and better treatment. Corporate media is zero. They might have mentioned it once, but that was it. It's a complete blackout.
Yeah, that's a big part of this, because I think so much of this is structural. The way we've set up our politics, the way we've set up our institutions, the way we've set up our so-called mainstream media, they all work to create the same kind of ethos, right? And as much as Brent might have a lot of complaints about a guy like Eric Weinstein, there is a gated institutional narrative among legacy media sources that really focus on some stories at the expense of others. And the stories that they're operating at the expense of are almost always those ones that suggest the possibility of actual transformation for actual citizens.
One thing I wanted to point out just from earlier remarks is that in these communities that I've been interfacing with, I've noticed Trump messages in Chinese, in Nepali, in Hindi, in Gujarati, circulating around with little video clips and long extended texts in these languages. And I've never seen anything like that for Biden or anything else. So it does really seem that this is being ignored, and I think it is a tactical thing. I think it's an attitudinal thing, and part of the attitudinal thing, I think, also is just they're already on our side. We don't need to do a lot of work there, unfortunately.
Now, that's a thing. Anybody who watched Crystal and Sagar when they were still on the Hill is probably familiar with Chuck Rocha, who was one of Bernie's right-hand men and his Latino outreach guy, and he did an incredible job because he wanted to get in there early and talk to people on the ground and make the messaging in the language about local issues. And when Biden finally became the nominee, he reached out regularly to the Democratic Party to say, this is how we do this. And they weren't interested in his feedback at all. They were much more interested in having somebody in Washington deciding what we think Latinos probably want rather than interfacing with them at all. So there's a definite, there's a way of using populism and real experience and interfacing with people that absolutely works. And there's a huge institutional apparatus that likes to claim they stand for people, but aren't really interfacing with them or taking them seriously at all.
Well, another one from that show, and he's a regular on the show now, is Sirota, who was key in Bernie's campaigns. And corporate media, zero. You'll only hear about him on shows, on YouTube. Young Turks, Breaking Points, and some of the other progressive media. And partly because he criticizes the corporate media in exactly what we're talking about, that the Democratic Party is not, listening to working class people.
I was thinking about some things Edward was saying a few minutes ago. On the one hand, about this sort of idea that liberals, being more educated, understand the value and needs of people who aren't like them. And that's an interesting thing, because in a way, the problem is not necessarily that there's this conservative style in which people privilege people like themselves, because we all sort of need to privilege ourselves and our family and people like us in various degrees. But it's the sense that you can only do that at the expense of someone else, that it's a zero-sum game of some kind, because you should put yours first to some degree, but you can't do that in a world where that costs everybody else, right? There's a sense of a scarcity mentality built into the way that the conservative version is sold to people. And there's a question a little bit separate from that. I mean, I love that you said people are looking for something that doesn't sound like a bunch of intellectual bullshit. Because the question here is, if it's about empathy, why is it that conservative economic and intellectual elites seem to be able to connect with and mobilize large segments of the working class when they aren't like those people and they don't empathize with them and they have a very different economic and intellectual background than those people? How does that connection stay so much tighter than seemingly the liberal connection with the working class?
Well, as Sirota has pointed out, and Thomas Frank has also pointed out in his book, Listen Liberal, many of the people in the upper echelons of the Republican elite are advertising and business majors, and they learn framing from early on, and they know how to manipulate it. Whereas many of the upper echelon in the liberal elite are lawyers and accountants and doctors, and they don't learn that. They learn the Enlightenment view that if you just present the facts, that's all you need. So it's a matter of, focus. And framing, to me, framing is that focus, how you message things. So people like Trump are good at it. He's a business person, although he's a corrupt business person who's scammed the system from day one. But as a business person, he knows how to talk the business bullshit and relate to people that aren't like him. In fact, he hates those people, but he knows how to reach them because he knows how to do the business bullshit. And liberals don't know how to do business bullshit. And that's part of my criticism of the party and liberalism, is they need to learn better framing, because it is effective. And if they don't do it, and if they don't accept this manipulation for the positive good, because manipulation, that's a bad characteristic. Manipulation is not in itself per se negative. They need to learn positive manipulation and to do it correctly. If they don't, that's why they lose.
One thing I think about that's important is the messaging around wealth. And again, I'm thinking back again to the immigrant communities. But there are a lot of people among the immigrants who make a lot of money, and also a lot of ordinary working class people who just are frugal and they invest correctly and they don't start from wealth, but they build it through careful management of their expenses and wise choices. We don't have a lot of money management taught, at the high school level or anything. And some of the immigrant communities are much better at teaching this to each other, how to manage money, how to save, how to collaborate, how to friends and family support to build up a business. And I mentioned him in the last meeting, I think, where I have a nephew who arrived with nothing and sleeping on my couch and now has $1 million house. He didn't do it through corruption. He did it through wise choices and the community working to support him at key moments. And then he gives back to the community. And we don't do this broadly in Anglo type culture, or liberal culture very much. So there's a languaging around the elite and the wealthy as a problem that I think a lot of people don't relate to, because there are people who get moderately wealthy through legitimate, wise money management, decisions and communal support that I think we could highlight and celebrate in a way that shows that we're not trying to create an absolute class dichotomy, but to recognize that there can be thriving if the community works together in a particular way and if there's wise decision making. It's not that. Yeah, I think we speak a little bit too much in a polarized way about the working class and the wealthy without recognizing some of the strategies that are in play among certain immigrant communities that help them to thrive more than other communities, and that we could learn from that, and that those could be principles that are celebrated and addressed wisely from the left instead of just demonized, because I think there's inadequate language around that. And when I listen to right-wing radio, I often hear that kind of talk, that they think that everybody who has money is there through ill-gotten means, and that's not the case. And definitely immigrant people don't resonate with that. It turns them off and it offends them because they've done it through frugality and community support and family support.
I think the word I'm really picking up on there, Bruce, is celebration. And that's, financial success and hard work and things like that are valued in various cultures is one thing you can celebrate. But I think there's a liberal tendency to be reticent about the dynamic polarization of language in general. They're much less likely to demonize and much less likely to celebrate, that this full affective range is a little bit retarded in them. Ryan Grimm on the Hill had a very interesting piece a couple of weeks ago about his work with Killer Mike around thinking about different kinds of interracial and multiracial heroes in American history. And I started thinking about how inspirational race theory might operate differently than critical race theory. And one of the differences there is whether you lean into the critical attitude or the celebratory attitude. And it does seem like a guy like Trump, for example, it's very easy for him to say that something is terrible and abhorrent and demonic, or it's the best, it's fantastic, it's unbelievable. He can lean into those superlatives on both ends. And there's something very human about that and very fun and very effectively polarizing. And it's very hard to imagine a language like that coming out of a Biden or a Kamala Harris or an Obama. They're kind of temperamentally fixed in the middle, which has done well for them in the system, but it doesn't excite people the way strong negatives and strong celebratory positives do.
Filling that silence. Agreed. Yeah, that's a great point.
I'll fill the silence, I guess. I'll add that, to extend that logic, the left wing counterpoint to a Trump would be, and I think this is kind of a joke, obviously, but like the Rock for president, right? I'd rather have the Bernie type as the counterpoint, or alternatively, like Jesse Ventura is put forward as like a left wing kind of Trump like just, speaks from the heart, has grounded kind of values, relatively good reading of history. But another point I wanted to comment on, I guess, is just what a slip, not to oppose you, Bruce, but what a slippery slope that is to talk about ethical money making under capitalism. Because obviously there's a lot of seedy, illegal ways. There's a lot of white collar crime. White collar crime is a huge problem that in the 90s, the FBI actually defunded their efforts. They kind of closed down their their white collar crime kind of units to focus on terrorism, especially once 9/11 happened, right? So these are the major, again, kind of meta contextual changes in American history, in the structure of society, and how we look at wealth, how we look at crime, that get glossed over. And yes, like, there are like hardworking ways that immigrants make businesses. Like, I'd say for the most part, it's all above board, right? They have restaurants or whatever. It's like, it's really hard type of business to run. But for the most part, in most places, if you have enough money, it's always easy to rent seek and just profit off real estate and rental income, which is this is a systemic problem, regardless of who's doing it. And so, I have a lot of real estate friends in Vancouver too, like old friends from high school and stuff. And they went into those career paths because it's very lucrative. You get rewarded for your hard work. But the meta question I'm putting out there is it really that ethical? How much can you pat yourself on the back? And what are those people doing with their money? Where is their politics going? Where do they lean politically? This is the meta point that I'm making. Money will almost absolutely corrupt you if you're not conscious about it and conscientious, and you have a kind of you have a political worldview that's informed and coherent about the nature of money and the structure of the economy, and how people get left out through no fault of their own. So it's a slippery slope how much we encourage business and entrepreneurship, and how much we celebrate that when it's successful.
It would have to come in tandem with a notion that challenges the underlying economic framework, right? You go, look, you can work hard and get rich and make money in this world we're talking about, in a world where things that are healthy and good for people pay off huge, and things that are insidious don't pay off as much. Because right now, the system has its thumb on the scale in all kinds of places that make it preferentially easy to make money in ways that are not good for everyone else. So it could do that in a different way. And if we were to do that in tandem with saying to people, look, there's a lot of opportunity for you to succeed here, then you might have a package that was really resonant with people and ethical and facing the future.
Yeah, and you guys know the name Dan Price? Does that ring a bell? Because it should ring a bell, because he's sort of made himself famous for being a CEO of a startup who took a 90% pay cut.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so he gives himself a salary of 70. He caps it at 70,000. And he's leading by example, right? And so it's worth obviously investigating, not just as a business practice, for sustainability, but the political point that he's making. And it does speak volumes, it does make the news from time to time, and he's pretty active online. So
yeah, the legal structures around wealth, right? And like so often the problem is not even so much the CEOs, which is what the individual imagines they would become if they were succeeding, but it's the framework of the investment class and where the profits have to go and how they're gauged and what the metrics are and all that kind of stuff. I mean, we can think there are problems with Elon Musk, there are problems with Jeff Bezos, but one of the reasons we talk about them is we get that they run a business or that they make some things, because the majority of the billionaires aren't even doing that. The majority of the billionaires are in a shuffling money around form of business that doesn't actually provide anything for anybody and just skims everyone. So that should be, from the point of view of the left, that should be a much more difficult thing to make money from. It should be much easier and more lucrative and worth celebrating if you're making money providing things for people.
We've hit the 2-hour mark. Should we start wrapping up?
Sure. I got nothing else to do, but I'm good either way. If you were going to make a final statement, Edward, what would you make? How would you sum up what we've been talking about today? Because I know we've been all over the place. We didn't necessarily stay on topic, which is fine because we're exploring a landscape together. But what do we all think that was said here today?
Liberals need to stick to their principles and fight like hell to implement them. And we need to realize that we're in the battle for democracy and we could lose it if we do not.
Liberals need to stop capitulating to the right and combine with and support the left, the large swath of progressive voters and progressive candidates. There needs to be some sort of a confluence that's in good faith. And I'll just add as a real closing thought, we didn't talk about this much, but there is a major serious problem in intellectual discourse with it being kind of dominated by and pulled towards moderate centrism. And with that is a lot of dogma. So it's not just that I'm against moderate centrism in principle as a lane. I'm not. I'm against the dogma and the defensiveness and the walls people put up about defending their dogma and the kind of evasiveness in all these adjacent communities that we're in. People shy away from the toughest topics, and then they end up buying into the most low-grade narrative about that topic. And so if we want to have an honest kind of resolution and path forward, we're going to have to people are going to have to talk to leftists, talk to us. It's going to have to expand beyond our little bubble here and vice versa. That's my final point for today. And that's my it's a kind of mantra that I'm always trying to hit because people are just not listening.
What I agree with about that is the danger of moderatism as a self-congratulatory ethos and as an assumed higher virtue, because yes, compromise is important. Yes, integration and balance are important, but it's so easy for that to be a front for moving toward a neutral position. And you're not neutral on a moving train, famously, right? You have to, if you come to the balance point in a system that's skewed in a certain direction, what you've done is support the skewing that it currently has. So that's not a balanced position at all. So there's a real danger in that moderatist ethos that we have to face. And I mean, if I take liberalism at face value, then there's a lot of ways in which it's failing to do its job. And we've talked about a lot of the things that might be needed, the kind of vision changes, the kind of messaging changes, who they have to ally with, who they have to reach out to, what kind of excitements they have to unfold, how they need to be more authentic. And I hope that's the case. But part of me thinks that maybe liberals are getting the exact results they actually want. And whether they know it or not, they do not wish to attain the things that they speak of, and that it's working out great as far as they're concerned. That's my nightmare version. So I'm torn between those.
Yeah, I think if I wanted to summarize some of the points that I've been making, one would be that there's a need for greater inclusion. Then we have to expand the inclusiveness of both strategically and in messaging and in thinking, in terms of being able to speak not only to different, you could say, external factors of race or economic condition or things like that, or class, but also to really to speak across cultures. We're not doing enough outreach and across value systems in a better way. And I think also looking at, I think it goes to a point that you were just making, Layman, that tepid reasonableness is not going to do us very much good in the long run. And I think a greater focus on actually sticking, I think this is something that Edward's been emphasizing, but really sticking to principles and really insisting that certain things get done and doing our best to actually realize them rather than whittling them away or letting things just drag on and on without ever being accomplished, and undermining any sense of trust among a lot of people that this is a group of competent people who can actually make the changes and implement the vision that's being brought forward.
There's some elements. If we come together again to have another conversation, I'd like to talk about some media issues, because we didn't touch on the way that social media and technology creates polarization and disinformation. There's also the sense in which I think the liberal temperament is anticipatorily retracted from public disfavor, like that they're more worried about, oh my God, people are saying bad things about us. Whereas obviously the Trumpists are much more able to lean into that and go and be happy with the fact that they're upsetting to a lot of people. And that might be a skill set that's needed going forward into the digital universe is, are we prepared to receive a lot of obscene flack from people and still stick to our principles, rather than hear a complaint and just back off our principles right away, which is all too common in the liberal bureaucracies of the world. So maybe touch on something like that.
As you can tell from me and my blog, I have no concern about that whatsoever.
I don't know. Shut it off. I guess we're done.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I think maybe even the next time, if we have another one, should be what the fuck is wrong with integralism and metamodernism?
I'd be up for that.
Yeah,
Okay.
integral and metamodernism. I can maybe weave some of this media critique in there. We could do that. And also I'm intrigued by, we don't often examine what left and right looks like in that space. Like what's the higher left and the higher right, and where does it fail and where might it succeed?
Yeah, there's lots more to say on all these topics, and I think we're good people to talk about that. And like you said at the outset, but both you, Bruce and Layman, like if other people want to get in on these conversations, they're welcome to. And we're four white guys who are critical of white guys, right? And of the people who oppose critical race theory. So that, the context always needs to be kind of honestly framed there. And the more honest we are and convergent and have more solidarity, the easier this will get. Like I said, like where are we on the minimum wage thing? Like this is a no-brainer. So it's kind of like that for every issue these days.